One of the most difficult and easiest things to do today is buying a new laptop. It's easy because there's a laptop for almost everybody out there depending on their needs. But it's also very difficult because there's so much variety, it can be a confusing and difficult decision to make to find the laptop that's best for you. Well, the good thing is that we can somewhat make it a easier process by focusing on features that might be the ones you want to consider. Keep in mind, the principle of this video is that you should know what your use case is when buying a laptop. Are you buying it for school use, for work use? What exactly are you going to be using it for? The more you know this, the more easier it becomes to boil down your list of potential laptops. And of course, these features are the ones you should keep in your consideration depending on your use case. As always, if you guys enjoy the content, hit that like button, sub to my channel, it genuinely helps me grow and puts a smile, a $10 smile. No matter which part of the world you're from, no matter which retailer you go to, whether it's online, in person, one common format I think a lot of people will find is the general technical specification format, which usually goes something like processor, system memory slash RAM, storage, and sometimes graphics as well. And this is a very simple but important aspect to look at when buying a machine. So starting off with processor, this is kind of the bread and butter in terms of the horsepower that your computer makes and what it's ultimately capable of. So if you're someone who's doing basic web browsing, watching videos on YouTube, doing online banking, and that's pretty much all you do, you don't need a lot of horsepower. You can get a processor like Core i3 or even lower an Intel Pentium processor or the AMD equivalents. But if you're someone who's doing more intensive activities, like let's say you do some occasional video editing or you like doing some occasional gaming as a side hobby, you may want to consider a Core i5 or a Ryzen 5500U processor. But if you're someone who's more hardcore than that, if you're doing some intensive coding or development work, if you're doing 4K video editing, or again, intensive gaming, you may want to consider a Core i7, Core i9, or Ryzen 9 type processor because these are heavy duty processors that can handle much higher workloads. Also, on that note, another huge factor to consider is RAM or system memory. RAM is kinda the instant memory of the computer. Without it, all the other parts just can't work at their peak. So I think in 2021, 8 gigabytes of RAM is the absolute bare minimum you should consider. If a computer has anything less than that, I am telling you, it's not future-proof, it's a bad decision, no matter what your use case might be. With that said, I think the sweet spot in terms of RAM, if you have the budget, is 16 gigabytes. This kind of gives you a lot of leeway for the future, and it gives you enough system memory to make sure you'll always have enough on hand, and applications like having lots of tabs open on Chrome, for example, won't become a problem in the near future. If you're the kind of person who keeps pictures of their children since the day where they were born all the way up till now, or all your dogs or your houses or whatever it is, well, you're seriously going to want to think about buying a laptop that has plenty of storage space, especially if you want to keep it locally. So whether you have media like videos, pictures, or music, or you install a ton of applications, they all take up space on your computer. And in today's time and age, it's very easy to run out of space. Most laptops nowadays start off with a baseline or entry-level storage capacity of 256 GB, although some do come in even lower capacities. I seriously think you should consider a laptop that has at least 500 gigabytes of storage or higher, especially because a lot of devices nowadays don't give the option to upgrade the storage once you buy it. It's kind of soldered on there, and whatever you buy is what you get. So keep that in mind. Of course, with that said, some laptops still do offer the ability to upgrade the storage, which is of course a great thing. The final technical specification that is relevant for a number of people is the GPU or graphical processing unit. So you'll notice that a lot of laptops have these dedicated graphics cards that come by companies like AMD and Nvidia in particular, and they're very much necessary if you want to have a high quality gaming experience. Or they can be helpful in the capacity of, let's say, intensive video editing like 4K video editing, or also when doing work like 3D modeling. A graphic card can really boost those experiences. Again, if you want to have a high resolution slash high detailed gaming experience, you need a GPU. But if you're someone who's just, again, browsing the web, a GPU is going to be of little help to you. So there are many GPUs, just like there are processors. There's lower end ones and higher end ones. Keep in mind, you want to do your research, and the more higher end you go with GPUs, the more exponentially expensive laptops tend to get, and same goes for desktops, so keep that in your consideration as well. Another very important question to ask yourself when buying a laptop is what screen size you need, because it actually dictates a number of things. So generally speaking, of course, people buy larger screens because they're easier to look at, they're more spread out, it's less draining on their eyes, and those are very real benefits. But larger laptops generally also have larger bodies, they weigh more, and they're more chunky, and they lack the portability element people often desire in a laptop. But on the flip side, you can get much smaller laptops like 12, 13, or 14-inch laptops. But in those cases, you have a much smaller screen that's harder to look at for some people. It's more concentrated and there's just less screen real estate. But the plus side being you get a much sleeker, slimmer form factor. It's much lighter and it's way more portable. Often so much so that the weight difference can be several pounds between a larger screen laptop and a lighter screen one. So you really want to again consider what you ultimately need in terms of screen size. Speaking of screens, another huge factor that's often overlooked is display quality, and we measure this with a number of common metrics. The first of those being resolution, which is simply the amount of pixels you have on the screen. So most modern day screens come with a standard or base resolution of Full HD/1080p, and this is a very healthy resolution in my opinion. Everything is clear enough, the detail is nice, most content on the web nowadays is optimized for a Full HD screen. You can go lower than this with just a mere HD screen, often known as a 720p display. However, I would not advise this because I just find it's not clear enough and these savings are often nominal between a Full HD and HD display. However, you can also go higher than Full HD, which I also think is a decision you should make only if you need to, because you're paying a ton more money. So you can get 2K or 4K displays, which are visibly more crisp and detailed, but they're only helpful if you're doing stuff like photo editing, color grading, or again, if you have a very particular reason or use case to do so. A lot of people often pay attention to the aspect ratio of their screen, which is simply the ratio between the width of your screen and the length. A 16:10 aspect ratio is more preferred to the traditional 16:9 because a lot of content just simply fits better. You get less black bars on your screen when watching certain videos. Also, beyond that, another very common attribute that a lot of people look at is refresh rate. While most standard laptops come with a refresh rate of 60 Hz, meaning the screen refreshes 60 times in a given second, some people who do gaming, for example, may prefer to get a screen with a 120 Hz or higher refresh rate because there's more refreshing going on in a second, the image looks smoother, motion looks more fluid, and a gaming experience can be visibly enhanced. However, I would advise going against anything higher than roughly 244 Hz because I think anything beyond that, for the most part, is a gimmick. You only kind of see a barely noticeable difference if you go higher than 244 Hz. So again, save yourself some money and kind of stay within that range if you are a gamer, and if you're a standard user who doesn't have a particular use case for gaming or anything of that nature, a 60 Hz refresh rate is more than enough. Ever notice how some laptops simply look more colorful, vivid, and lively than others? Well, that's because they actually are. And this is a measurable metric that usually comes in the form of color range or color gamut. And there's a number of metrics we use to measure them. The most common ones known are sRGB, Adobe RGB, and also DCI-P3. And if you go on any given manufacturer's website, you'll often find that they kind of have this hidden under the technical specifications of the display itself. If you're someone who's just going to be looking at articles online or going on Microsoft Excel, then you don't necessarily need a very high color accuracy, and let's say you could get away with a display that only has a mere 70% sRGB rating. But if you are any sort of creative user who does photo editing, video editing, color grading, at the bare minimum you should consider a display with a 100% sRGB rating. However, I'd argue for the highest quality experience, anything below 90% Adobe RGB should not be considered by a creative professional. There are displays that offer very high quality color ratings, but they do cost a ton more than cheaper displays. But again, this is definitely something a professional may want to consider in that particular niche. And finally, another huge aspect of display quality is peak brightness. We usually measure this in nits. So at a bare minimum, you should get a laptop that has at least 300 nits of peak brightness. And the reason for that is because while any laptop can look good in a dark room, the minute you open those curtains, let some daylight in, or you turn on all the lights in your home or use it outdoors, you'll notice that some laptop screens are very difficult to look at. There's just too much glare and external light for the screen to actually show anything. anything. That's why you need higher nits. And of course, the higher the nits, the more easier it is to look at the screen in brighter settings. A high quality display will generally have at least 400 nits of peak brightness, or even higher than that in some cases, and that's of course even better. Also keep in mind, depending on the type of display you get, you may want to consider more or less nits. So if you have a reflective display, then that reflects a lot of light from external factors, and you're going to need a higher display to compensate for that. But if you have a matte display, it doesn't produce as much glare, so a lower nit screen that just has 300 nits, for example, may be more than sufficient in those cases. Another thing of great importance is the operating system. So there are three primary OSs that I find have become very prominent in the market. There's of course Windows OS, which is the most dominant. There's Apple's Mac OS, and in more recent times, there's Google's Chrome OS. And all three of these are catered for three very different audiences. For example, if you're someone who's just browsing the web and kind of wants tablet-like functionality in the form of a laptop, Chrome OS is fantastic. It offers a built-in web browser, Google's own app store, and it gives you all the basic necessities you need to have a nice, simple experience. If you are someone who's heavily invested into Apple's ecosystem, then macOS is a fantastic option. It integrates very nicely with the rest of Apple's products, and it also has this nice simplicity to it that a lot of people prefer. Now, with that said, Windows OS is the most prominent choice, and it's the one where I'm focusing on the most in terms of features, because this is the operating system that's most widely available and the most well known to most people. And if you tend to use a lot of third-party applications, you'll find that Windows by far has the best compatibility in that regards. The final and also equally important factor to consider is battery life, especially if portability is of concern to you. So generally speaking, laptops measure their battery capacity in milliamps, and most laptops range between 2000 milliamps to 6000, although some can go even higher than that. And on paper, the more milliamps you have, the better your battery life should be, but that's often far from the truth. A much better indicator is realistic or as tested battery life. This is usually available after a couple of weeks after the laptop has publicly released, and is available on a bunch of sites like Notebook Check, for example. Sometimes the manufacturer will also advertise their average battery life, although always take it with a grain of salt when the manufacturer mentions it versus other dedicated reviewing third-party sites. And a good example of this is the MacBook Air, for example. The M1 version of the MacBook Air can get upwards of 17 plus hours of battery life on a single charge. However, with the same exact test, the Dell Inspiron 5510 only gets 7.5 hours. See how it's a much better indicator than just looking at the milliamp rating, because you get the real world usage and it kind of tells you what you're going to get out of the box. Hopefully by the time you're done watching this video, you have a somewhat better idea of the kind of laptop you need. Again, if you go in knowing what your use case is, it becomes much more easier to decide the kind of laptop you need, because you focus on the features that you need and compromise on the ones that aren't all that important to you. But if you still need more guidance, let me know in the comment section below. I can make videos about specific features in more depth or detail. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, found it to be helpful in whatever capacity, hit that like button, sub to my channel. Thanks for watching.